Author's note: I know readers might wonder why I'm using my name as the character in this literary franchise, maybe assuming it was out of vanity or grandiosity. That's not the case. The reason is simple: attention. In a noisy world, creativity often needs a signal flare. What I'm doing with Basically Done is something new, something that, as far as I know, no other untrained author has done. I've written a novel, produced a full original soundtrack for it, creating the story film series, all while building and distributing everything independently. This is a vertically integrated, self-sustaining creative ecosystem, a living proof that Hollywood and the big publishers are, well, basically done. The goal isn't fame, it's freedom. I want to show that the playing field has leveled. Anyone with imagination, grit, and drive can create something real, complete, and world-class without waiting for permission. My hope is to inspire millions of others to do the same. Creativity in the internet-tainment era has opened the gates for the next generation of storytellers, artists, and dreamers. The world is wide open. Go make something. I am Donald E. Pickett. Thank you for your support, and I hope you enjoy my story.
I woke in the still of the morning, coffee steam in a sideways sun. No warning came with the dawning, but the edges had already begun.
Chasing the dream, the road ahead faded to black, though it looked like gold in the gleam.
Every truth has a shadow, every light burns a cost. You don't know you're on the edge till you've already lost. I'm standing on the edge of it all, hearing the cracks start to call. The sky's still blue, but the wind's grown cold, and the story's about to unfold.
Chapter 1. Kicked to the Curb. "So everything's coming together," Jill said, already mid-sentence when Donald picked up the phone. "Dad's flying us down in the King Air, so that's handled. Ned's coming too, and he's bringing Denise. It'll be us, them, and I'm talking with Wilbur about getting the boys over there. James might come in from Chicago, but he's not sure yet." Donald leaned back in his chair, smiling. "You've practically built a flight manifest. Have you been able to confirm if Uncle Davis and Aunt Caroline are coming?" "I think so," Jill said. "Not 100% yet, but they're trying to make it work. Caroline's got that charity event that weekend, and Davis is seeing if he can move his meeting in Atlanta up a day. They both really want to come. And yes, we've got plenty of guests. Bill's coming with Nadine. I've spoken to Walt and Mary, and they're in. And, of course, you and Wendy. If the cousins make it, and Davis and Caroline can pull it off, we're looking at a really wonderful birthday party for Mom." Donald chuckled softly. "Yeah, but I still don't get this whole surprise element. the second she gets on that plane and sees it heading south over open water, she's gonna know exactly where she's going. You can't sneak up on Joe's Island. She'll recognize that approach the minute we drop into the airspace. That's fine, Jill said. The surprise isn't the place. It's the people. Donald smiled, shaking his head. Yeah, that's true. Once she steps out and sees everyone waiting on the runway, she'll be so happy. Exactly, Jill said, satisfied. That's the moment we're going for. All right, he said. Then I'll keep my mouth shut. Bahamas it is. Good. And don't forget, pack light. Joe's got everything covered. She hung up without another word. Classic Jill. Donald set the receiver down, still smiling. The hum of the office settled back around him, faint and steady. Blueprints waited. Deadlines waited. But for a moment his mind drifted to the steady sound of twin props and turquoise water and the look on his mother's face when she stepped off that plane into sunshine, family, and the kind of birthday no one could top. At 1:47 p.m. on June 30th, 1998, Donald Pickett was putting the final touches on a highly classified design that would change the trajectory of his life forever. Lead architectural engineer at Rosen International, he held the highest civilian clearance on a project destined for General McInerney at the Department of Defense, a man whose reputation preceded him through the corridors of military intelligence. He leaned closer to his monitor, blue light casting shadows across his focused features as he scanned the plans one final time. This wasn't just another government job. It was part of a vast, compartmentalized initiative spanning continents, reaching into countries whose names appeared only in classified briefings. Rosen International's contract represented hundreds of millions of dollars and geopolitical reach extending into the next decade. The scope was staggering, even to someone who had worked on sensitive projects for 7 years. Most team members saw only fragments of the puzzle, carefully siloed pieces that revealed nothing of the greater design. But Donald saw it all, every connection, every strategic placement, every detail that made the project a masterwork of military architecture and tactical planning. That comprehensive knowledge made him exactly the kind of liability that could not be tolerated. His direct supervisor, Nigel Rosen, was president of the company and the cold, controlling son of CEO Randall Rosen. The Rosen dynasty stretched back to the company's founder, Arnold Rosen, Randall's grandfather, and a former intelligence officer with ties reaching back to the Manhattan Project. Arnold had been the kind of man who spoke in whispers and handshakes, building relationships that transcended political administrations. Rosen International, founded in 1947 during the early days of the Cold War, had roots running deep into the classified core of America's defense machine. The company's contracts drew senators and generals to the family's table, their influence a silent force no employee dared question. Now, publicly traded and headquartered in Charlotte's gleaming towers, it remained firmly in family hands, a dynasty built on secrets and steel. Donald had been with Rosen International since graduating at the top of his class from Georgia Tech in 1991, arriving with the kind of idealism and technical brilliance that made old-timers like Arnold Rosen take notice. Clean-cut and dedicated, with a moral compass that seemed increasingly rare in corporate America, he'd dated the same girl, Wendy Reynolds, since freshman year of high school, a relationship that had the storybook quality. Both sets of parents cherished. The son of Buster and Hope Pickett, Donald had been raised with a simple, uncompromising moral code. Treat everyone with respect, especially those who had nothing to offer in return. He carried that philosophy into marble lobbies and executive suites where others played games he didn't understand. He wasn't one to navigate corporate politics or curry favor with executives. Instead, he acknowledged those others ignored: janitors, interns, security guards, and administrative assistants, with the same dignity he showed to vice presidents and board members. His reputation in the company was solid gold. The guy who remembered everyone's birthday, who asked about their kids' soccer games, who made the workplace feel more human in an industry built on cold calculations. The irony wasn't lost on him that his dedication to doing things right would be exactly what destroyed him. His desk phone rang, cutting through the quiet concentration of his corner office. "Donald, are you completed yet?" The voice belonged to Randall Rosen, the CEO, and there was something in his tone, a tension perhaps, or an urgency, that Donald couldn't quite place. "Very close, sir. I ran into a measurement correlation issue this morning, but I resolved it by lunch. I'll be sending the file to Major Collier shortly. I understand General McInerney moved the deadline up, but I'm ahead of schedule." Donald glanced at his watch, 1:47 p.m. He'd been working on this project for 8 months, and every detail was burned into his memory. "Thank you, Pickett." The line went dead. Donald hung up, puzzled by the brevity. It was unusual for the CEO to check on individual projects directly, especially where the chain of command ran through Nigel. Still, deadlines made everyone nervous, especially when they involved generals who had the power to make or break companies like Rosen International. He turned back to his monitor, fingers hovering over the keyboard, as he prepared to upload the final file to the secure DoD server. Just as his finger moved toward the enter key, his desk phone rang again, this time from Nigel, his voice carrying the kind of authority that brooked no argument. "Donald, I need you in my office, now." "Sir, I'm literally minutes away from finalizing the file. Can it wait 20 minutes? I'd hate to miss the general's deadline because—" "No, it's urgent. Leave what you're doing and come up." The emphasis on urgent sent a chill down Donald's spine. In 7 years at Rosen International, he'd learned to read the subtle variations in Nigel's voice. And this wasn't routine. This was the voice Nigel used when something had gone seriously wrong. Frustrated but obedient, Donald saved his work with automatic precision, then made his way to the elevator. As the doors closed and began their ascent, he tried to think of what could be so urgent that it couldn't wait 20 minutes. A change in specifications, a security concern. He had no idea he was riding to his professional execution. 7 years earlier, fresh out of Georgia Tech, Donald had worn a navy blue suit he couldn't quite afford and a tie his father helped him pick out. Nigel hadn't smiled during their first handshake. Let's see if your resume lives up to the hype. Randall had welcomed him to the family that first day, and Donald believed it. He'd called his father that evening. "It's everything I hoped for, Pop. I really think I can build something here." Buster's response had been characteristically understated. "Just remember who you are, son. Don't let them change that." Now, nearly 7 years later, the idealism had been tempered by experience, but Buster's stern upbringing had instilled in Donald a strength that couldn't be shaken by corporate games or personal attacks, which was exactly why what was about to happen would cut so deep. Nigel stood behind his grand mahogany desk, stone-faced in a way that suggested barely controlled anger. His fingers drummed once against the leather desk pad, a subtle tell that Donald had learned to recognize. Here was the grandson of the company's founder, a man whose family name was etched into the very foundation of this empire. And yet he found himself seething with jealousy that his employee, his subordinate, held security clearances that even he, with all his birthright and power, could not access. It was intolerable that Donald Pickett, son of a middle-class family from nowhere special, possessed the trust of generals, while Nigel remained locked out of the very secrets his own grandfather had helped create. The jealousy burned like acid, mixed with the cold satisfaction of finally having the power to destroy what he could never possess. "You're aware that General McInerney moved the timeline. Your leeway is gone." The words came out clipped, precise, like a scalpel making an incision. "Yes, Mr. Rosen. I've already adjusted my schedule to accommodate the change. The file would be completed and uploaded by now if I weren't here." Donald kept his voice level, professional, even as he wondered why a scheduling issue required this dramatic summons. "Do you have complete section correlation? Every measurement verified? Every specification double-checked?" Nigel's questions were sharp, precise, delivered like a prosecutor questioning a witness. "Yes, sir. The only pending item is a formal checklist review from DOD, but according to protocol, we're not at that stage yet. That comes after initial submission and preliminary approval." Donald had memorized every step of the process, every regulation that governed the handling of classified materials. "Good. Before you go, I need you to give me the file." The request was delivered with casual authority, but Donald caught something else underneath. Anticipation, perhaps, or satisfaction. "Sir?" "That's out of protocol. The secure file transfer goes directly to Major Collier's server. Chain of custody requirements. General McInerney asked me to review it personally before submission. Here's a letter." Nigel slid a document across the desk, and Donald picked it up with hands that were suddenly less steady. Behind Nigel, a framed photo of Arnold Rosen shaking hands with a Cold War-era general hung on the wall, a reminder of the dynasty's untouchable reach. The letter looked official, the right letterhead, the right formatting, even what appeared to be the general's signature. But something didn't sit right. Some instinct honed by years of working with documentation where precision mattered. Maybe it was the phrasing, which seemed slightly off from the military's typical bureaucratic language. Maybe it was the timing. Or maybe it was simply that Nigel was asking him to violate every protocol he'd been trained to follow. I'll need to verify this with Major Collier. The clearance chain of custody is pretty explicit about. Don't make this complicated, Donald. Nigel's smile was razor-thin, predatory. We're all on the same team here. General McInerney, Major Collier, myself, we all want the same thing. Just follow the process. The phrase, just follow the process, hung in the air like a challenge, and Donald felt the first real stirring of unease. In his 7 years at Rosen International, he'd never been asked to violate protocol. Complex procedures existed for good reasons, especially when dealing with classified materials that could affect national security. Donald returned to his office with a growing sense that something fundamental had shifted in his world. The conversation replayed in his mind as he walked through corridors that suddenly felt less familiar, past colleagues who seemed to avoid eye contact. "Dylan's in your office," said Samuel, his assistant, as Donald approached his workspace. Samuel was a recent hire, earnest and eager to please, but now his voice wavered. "What?" The word came out sharper than Donald intended, but the idea of someone from IT, especially someone like Dylan North, accessing his classified materials, sent alarm bells ringing. Donald burst through his office door to find Dylan North, head of IT, seated at his workstation, fingers moving across his keyboard with practiced efficiency. Dylan was thin with prematurely graying hair and the pale complexion of someone who spent too much time in server rooms. He looked up with an expression that seemed carefully neutral. "What are you doing at my terminal?" Donald's voice carried an authority he rarely used. "System updates. We detected a virus signature in the network, and your terminal was flagged as a priority. Can't be too careful with classified materials." Dylan's explanation sounded rehearsed. "You're not cleared for this terminal. You know that. Step away from my workstation immediately." Donald moved toward his desk, and Dylan stood slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "Just doing my job, Donald. Security protocols, you understand?" As Dylan left, Donald immediately reclaimed control of his workstation, changing his password and checking his system for unauthorized access. Everything appeared normal on the surface, but the violation left him feeling exposed. He checked his email for any communication from Major Collier that might explain the conflicting instructions from Nigel. Nothing. Radio silence from the Pentagon, which was strange given the compressed timeline. Donald called Sally to tell her he needed to speak to Nigel again, urgency creeping into his voice despite his efforts to remain professional. "He's in accounting, reviewing quarterly projections. I'll let him know you need to see him." The minutes felt like hours. Donald paced his office, checking and rechecking his files for any sign that Dylan had accessed classified materials. The protocol violation was serious enough to warrant formal investigation, possibly criminal charges, if classified information had been exposed. When Nigel finally appeared at his door, his expression had hardened into something that looked almost like accusation. "You emailed Major Collier. Why?" The question was delivered like an indictment. "To verify a chain of custody issue regarding the letter you showed me. That's standard protocol when there's any question about authorization." Donald kept his voice steady, but he could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. Major Collier wasn't happy about being questioned. "You're getting a pass this time, but this isn't a game, Donald. We've had federal clearances since the 1940s. You don't question internal reviews, especially when they come from the highest levels of the Pentagon." "Then perhaps you can explain why Dylan North was accessing my terminal without proper clearance. That's a serious security breach that needs to be reported." "He found a virus. That's the extent of it. Nothing more, nothing less." "There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding here, Mr. Rosen. The protocol requirements, the timing." Donald never got to finish his sentence. "You're needed upstairs. Randall wants to see you immediately." The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like a descent into hell, though Donald was riding upward. The elevator's hum filled the silence, its mirrored walls reflecting a stranger, sweat-dampened, uncertain. By the time the doors opened, his shirt clung to his back, and his mouth had gone dry with a fear he couldn't yet name. When he arrived at Randall's corner office, both Nigel and Randall were waiting. They stood like judges who had already reached their verdict, their positions carefully choreographed. Randall's usual warmth, the avuncular smile that had welcomed Donald 7 years ago, was gone, replaced by a gaze as cold as the marble lobby below. "Donald, we have a problem. The file you prepared is corrupted." Randall's voice carried the weight of finality, as if the conversation were merely a formality. "What? That's not possible. I checked every element before saving. The file was clean when I uploaded it to the secure server." The room seemed to tilt around Donald. "According to our IT department, the virus originated from your system. Dylan's analysis suggests deliberate corruption." Nigel's words fell like stones into still water, possibly indicating sabotage. The way he said sabotage made Donald's skin crawl. Too much satisfaction in the syllables. "We just discussed this. Dylan accessed my machine without proper clearance. I have backup files, redundant systems, multiple verification protocols." "Dylan hasn't been on the 3rd floor today," Nigel interrupted, his voice cutting across Donald's explanation like a blade. Every time Donald tried to present his case, Nigel would cut him off, redirect the conversation, or simply talk over him. "That's not true. Ask Samuel. He told me Dylan was in my office when I returned from our meeting." "Samuel is mistaken," Nigel said flatly, not allowing Donald to finish his sentence. Donald looked to Randall for support, but the older man simply nodded in agreement with his son. Randall reached for his phone and activated the speaker with a deliberate motion that suggested this conversation had been anticipated. "Samuel, can you come in here for a moment?" Donald's assistant appeared within seconds, moving with nervous energy that suggested he understood the gravity without knowing the details. Was Dylan North in Donald's office today? Randall's question was casual, almost conversational. "No, sir. I haven't seen Dylan in months, actually. Not since the last system-wide update." Samuel's response was immediate and certain, delivered without hesitation. though Donald noticed his pen had snapped in his grip, his eyes darting briefly to Nigel as if pleading for escape. "Samuel!" Donald's voice carried a note of desperation that surprised even him. "You told me Dillon was in my office. You said it when I came back from meeting with Mr. Rosen." Samuel looked genuinely confused, his eyes moving between Donald and the two executives as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. I don't remember saying that, Donald. I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion. Don't get me mixed up in your little games." Again, when Donald tried to press the issue, Nigel stepped in. "That's enough. Samuel, thank you." "Wait, I need to—" Donald began. "I said that's enough," Nigel repeated, his tone brooking no argument. The room fell silent except for the barely audible hum of air conditioning. Donald felt like he was watching his life collapse, each revelation building on the last. Nigel leaned forward, his eyes carrying cold satisfaction. "Your employment with Rosen International is under immediate review, pending a full investigation into potential security breaches and possible industrial espionage." What? Is this some sort of joke? "Do I joke, Donald Pickett?" Randall stated. "Your actions are clear, Pickett," Nigel added, cutting off any response Donald might have made. "No, wait. There's a serious misunderstanding here." "Yes, there is, Donald," Randall interrupted. "Hiring you, clearly." "How long has this been going on?" Every time Donald tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to defend himself, Nigel would interrupt or redirect. It was like trying to argue with a wall that kept moving to block every avenue of escape. "No, this isn't right. There has to be some mistake. I followed every protocol, every procedure, every security requirement to the letter. I need time to review what happened." Randall's interruption was swift and merciless. "You're terminated, effective immediately." His tone suggested he was enjoying this, more than appropriate for a man destroying someone's career. "Your security clearance is revoked, and you are banned from accessing any company property or materials." "You can't be serious. 7 years of perfect service, and you're willing to destroy my career over what has to be some kind of error." "Sally, call security immediately." Randall's voice carried the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Mr. Rosen, I've done nothing wrong. Check the surveillance footage, review the security logs, interview other employees. There has to be evidence that will prove." "It is in the middle of upgrading our security systems," Nigel interrupted, and Donald caught the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "How convenient for someone in your position that the surveillance system is temporarily offline." The setup was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its completeness. Donald realized with crystalline clarity that this had been planned long before today, possibly from the moment he'd first walked through those revolving doors 7 years ago. Security Chief David Jackson entered the office, accompanied by Ralph Fleming, 2 men Donald had considered friends, colleagues who had shared coffee breaks and casual conversations. Now they looked at him with the professional distance that security personnel maintain when dealing with a potential threat. escort Mr. Pickett off the premises immediately, issue a formal trespass order, and ensure that he understands the legal consequences of any attempt to return to company property. Randall's instructions were delivered with the precision of someone who had given similar orders before. I need my personal belongings, my wallet, my car keys, my laptop, family photographs. Everything will be inventoried and sent to your home address after a thorough security review. Consider yourself fortunate that we're not pressing criminal charges at this time. Nigel's response was delivered with false magnanimity that made Donald's blood boil. David's hand moved to rest on his sidearm, a gesture that was probably unconscious but carried unmistakable meaning. "Let's go, Donald. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The walk through the office was the longest journey of Donald's life. David Jackson's firm grip on his arm felt foreign. This was the same man who had clapped him on the back just 2 months ago at the company picnic, grinning as he watched Donald pitch softball to David's 8-year-old son. "You're good with kids, Pickett," David had said, sharing a beer afterward. "Sarah and I always said you and Wendy are going to make great parents someday." Now David's eyes were professional, distant, his jaw clenched tight, his free hand twitching as if to offer a comforting gesture before duty held him back, his hand resting near his weapon as if Donald were a genuine threat. As they passed the reception area, Donald caught sight of Sally Matthews arranging files at her desk. She glanced up, then quickly looked away, but not before Donald remembered her face 3 years ago at the company Christmas party. She'd been crying in the break room because her husband had been laid off right before the holidays. Donald had quietly arranged for her to receive a substantial bonus for exceptional service, and helped her husband find a position with one of Rosen's contractors. "You're an angel, Donald," she'd whispered, hugging him. "I don't know what we would have done." Now she couldn't meet his eyes. They passed the conference room where he'd received his Newcomer of the Year award in 1992. Donald could still see himself standing at that podium, overwhelmed by the recognition, his voice catching as he thanked Buster and Hope Pickett for their guidance. The entire room had given him a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. For a split second, he glimpsed another memory, his first major presentation in this same room, heart-pounding as he'd pitched his innovative design approach to Nigel and the board, the room erupting in applause when he'd finished. Now both memories stung like fresh wounds. Nigel himself had presented the award, his cold demeanor replaced by what seemed like genuine pride. "This young man represents everything we value at Rosen International," Nigel had announced. "Integrity, brilliance, and dedication to excellence." After the ceremony, Nigel had taken Donald to the Palm, Charlotte's most exclusive steakhouse, where they'd talked for hours about the future, about projects and possibilities. Donald had called Wendy that night, barely able to contain his excitement. "I think I've found my place in the world." The memory shattered as they approached the elevator bank where a small crowd of colleagues had gathered. Michael Hoffman from the drafting department stood frozen, his face a mask of confusion. Just last month, Michael's daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia, and Donald had organized the entire office to donate sick days so Michael could take family leave without losing pay. They'd raised enough to cover 6 months of salary. Michael had broken down in Donald's office, sobbing with gratitude. "You saved my family," he'd said. Now Michael stepped back as they passed, as if Donald were contagious. Jennifer Walsh from accounting pressed herself against the wall as the security escort moved past. Jennifer, whose wedding Donald and Wendy had attended just 18 months ago, where Donald had given a toast that brought the entire reception to tears. Jennifer, who had asked Donald to walk her down the aisle when her father couldn't make it from overseas. She'd kissed his cheek and called him the brother she'd never had. Now she stared at him like he was a stranger, or worse, a criminal. Near the main corridor, Donald spotted Robert Chin, the junior engineer he'd been mentoring for the past year. Robert had struggled with confidence, and Donald had spent countless hours after work helping him develop his skills, sharing techniques and insights he'd learned over the years. "You're the reason I didn't quit," Robert had told him just 2 weeks ago. "You believed in me when nobody else did." Now Robert looked away, his face flushed with what might have been shame or fear. As they approached the lobby, Ralph Fleming stepped into formation beside David. Ralph, whose daughter's high school graduation Donald and Wendy had attended last spring, sitting in the bleachers and cheering as if Emily were their own child. Ralph, who had invited them to countless barbecues and birthday parties, who considered Donald family. "Emily's applying to Georgia Tech because of you," Ralph had said at the graduation party. "You're her hero. She wants to be an engineer just like you." Near the main exit, Bob Wells from Facilities Management noticed the commotion and stepped forward, his face etched with shock and genuine concern. "Donald, are you okay?" Bob's voice carried the kind of worry reserved for close friends. Donald looked at him with grateful eyes. Finally, someone who seemed to see him as a human being rather than a security threat. "Bob, could someone call me a cab? They took my keys, my wallet." "I got you," Bob said immediately, already reaching for his phone. "Don't worry about it." The memories cascaded faster now, each face a reminder of the life he was losing. There was Patricia from Human Resources, whose son's Little League team Donald had sponsored. There was James from IT, not Dylan, but the decent guy who had helped Donald set up his home computer and stayed for dinner afterward. There was Maria from Facilities, whose English Donald had helped improve during lunch breaks, and who now managed the entire custodial staff. Every relationship, every kindness, every human connection he'd built over 7 years, all of it crumbling with each step toward the exit. Heads turned as he passed, conversation stopped mid-sentence, and the normal sounds of a busy workplace fell to whispers. People whose children he knew by name, whose personal struggles he'd listened to with genuine concern, now stared at him like he was a stranger, or worse, a traitor. The man who had sent Christmas cards to everyone in the building, who had remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who had made the workplace feel more human, was being marched out like a common criminal. But the cruelest moment came as they passed Nigel's office one final time. Through the glass walls, Donald could see his former supervisor on the phone, probably already spinning a story, already rewriting history. But for a split second, Donald remembered a different Nigel, The man who had taken him aside after his first major presentation to the Pentagon, the presentation that had secured the current contract. They'd gone to that same steakhouse again, and Nigel had been almost paternal in his praise. "You have a gift, Donald," he'd said, raising his glass, "a rare combination of technical brilliance and moral clarity. This company is lucky to have you. Hell, this country is lucky to have you." They talked until nearly midnight about the responsibility that came with their work, about the weight of designing structures that would protect American soldiers. For one evening, the cold corporate mask had slipped, and Donald had seen something almost human in Nigel Rosen's eyes. Now there was nothing but calculation behind that glass, nothing but the satisfied expression of a man who had successfully executed a plan. In the lobby, Charlotte Police Department officers were waiting with the kind of official presence that suggested this wasn't routine. Their uniforms were crisp, their expressions professional, and their very presence sent a message that Donald's situation had moved beyond corporate politics into potential criminal activity. "Mr. Donald Pickett, you are hereby issued a formal trespass order barring you from entering the premises at 81,100 Rosen Circle. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and criminal prosecution to the full extent of the law." The officer's words were delivered with bureaucratic precision, each syllable carefully enunciated for legal clarity. "There must be some kind of misunderstanding here. This doesn't make any sense." Donald's voice carried a note of disbelief he couldn't hide. "Take it up in civil court, sir. That's outside our jurisdiction." The officer's response was neutral, professional, and utterly unsympathetic. As they approached the building's exit, Ralph Fleming, a man Donald had shared countless lunches with, whose daughter's graduation Donald had attended, leaned close enough to whisper, "You were the only one who ever treated us like people instead of just uniforms. I'm sorry this is happening to you." The words hit Donald harder than any of the accusations or legal threats. Ralph believed him, or at least believed that something wasn't right. But belief without power was just sympathy, and sympathy wouldn't restore his reputation or career. Donald was silent as they escorted him to the building's exit, past the revolving doors that had welcomed him 7 years earlier with such promise. The June afternoon sun was brutal after the building's controlled climate, and the heat struck him like a physical force. Donald didn't move right away. He simply stood on the sidewalk outside Rosen International, his body language that of a man who had been struck by lightning and was still processing the fact that he had somehow survived. His hands were steady, Buster's training showing itself even now, but his mind reeled from the speed and precision of what had just happened. The bright June sunlight burned through his suit, the humid Charlotte air clinging to his skin like a suffocating weight, the distant buzz of uptown traffic, a cruel reminder of a world moving on without him. He barely registered the physical discomfort. It was nothing compared to the shock that was only beginning to settle in. A few employees from neighboring buildings glanced in his direction as they went about their daily routines, heading to late meetings, returning from errands, conducting the mundane business of lives that were still intact and predictable. Some probably recognized him from industry events. A few might have wondered why a man in an expensive suit was standing alone on a sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon, looking like he had just received devastating news. But most simply looked away, as people do when confronted with someone else's private catastrophe. No one said a word. No one offered help. In the space of 3 hours, Donald had become invisible, a non-person whose professional existence had been erased as efficiently as deleting a file from a computer. His keys were gone, not just his office keys, but his car keys, trapped somewhere in the building behind him in a desk drawer or confiscated as potential evidence in a crime he didn't commit. His security badge, which had been his passport to a world of classified projects and cutting-edge technology, was now just a piece of plastic that would trigger alarms if he tried to use it. Even his wallet was beyond his reach, probably sitting in his desk drawer like a monument to a life that no longer existed. His reputation, built over 7 years of exemplary work, professional integrity, and genuine relationships with colleagues, had been eviscerated in under an hour with surgical precision. And for what? A file he didn't corrupt? Created using systems he didn't sabotage as part of a conspiracy he was only beginning to understand. A delivery truck rumbled past on Rosen Circle, its diesel engine adding to the urban symphony of a city that continued to function despite the fact that Donald's world had stopped. The sound seemed to mock him. Life going on, routines continuing, the world spinning forward while he stood motionless and shaken. But as he stood there in the oppressive June heat, Donald felt something he'd never experienced before: complete disorientation. Nothing made sense. The speed of it, the precision, the way everyone seemed to know things he didn't. His mind kept trying to find logic in the chaos, to understand how his perfect day had turned into a nightmare, but every attempt at reasoning led to more confusion. He had been kicked to the curb, but he couldn't begin to understand why. This felt like more than simple corporate backstabbing, but what it actually was remained beyond his comprehension. A puzzle with pieces that didn't fit together, a reality that had shifted beneath his feet without warning. Looking at his watch, Donald allowed himself one thought. Man, I'm glad I have Wendy right now. Maybe she'll help me make sense of all this. He had lost a good job, but his world felt completely upended in ways he couldn't explain. Whatever this was, whatever had just happened to him, he was lost. Buster Pickett had raised his son to be strong, but right now, Donald Pickett felt utterly broken, confused, betrayed, and desperately needing the one person who could anchor him in a reality that no longer made sense. And my parents, he thought, and that added to his anxiety on an entirely different level. Achieving his parents' expectations had been paramount in his life, and having them see these accusations was beyond his comprehension. The cab Bob had called for him pulled up to the curb, its yellow paint faded but welcoming. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked at Donald with concern. "You the guy needs a ride? Your friend said you'd be waiting out here." Donald nodded, grateful for Bob's kindness, even in his darkest moment. As he climbed into the back seat, he realized he was about to begin a journey he never could have imagined, A man with no keys, no wallet, no job, and no understanding of what had just destroyed his life. The cab pulled away from Rosen International, and Donald watched through the rear window as the building that had been his professional home for 7 years grew smaller and smaller, until it disappeared entirely behind the Charlotte skyline. The June sun scorched the corner of Rosen Circle and Sardis Road, humid air clinging to Donald Pickett like a second skin. He stood on the sidewalk outside Rosen International, staring up at the glass tower that had been his professional home for 7 years. Through third-floor windows, he could see movement. Colleagues going about their Wednesday afternoon routines, unaware that one of their own had just been erased. Or maybe they knew. Maybe everyone knew by now. His hands trembled as he loosened his tie. Somewhere up there, on the desk he'd never touch again, sat the framed photo of him and Wendy from last Christmas. His engineering certifications hung on the wall. Would they mail those back or just throw them away? A silver Lexus pulled out of the executive parking area. Patricia from HR. She slowed at the exit, and for a moment their eyes met through her windshield. Donald raised his hand in a half wave. Patricia looked away and accelerated onto Rosen Circle. The cut surprised him, sharp and immediate. She'd hugged him at the company picnic 3 weeks ago, told him he was one of the good ones. Now she couldn't even nod. Unable to stand there like a kicked dog, Donald started toward the gas station on Sardis Boulevard, change from lunch jangling in his pocket. A cab rolled into view before he made it 20 yards. Yellow paint chipped but bright against gray asphalt. He raised his arm. 1187 Winter Ridge Road, he said, sliding into the back seat. He needed Wendy, her voice, her presence, and cash for the fare. In one brutal hour from 2 to 3 p.m., Rosen International had stripped him of his wallet, keys, and dignity. The cabbie pulled into traffic. Joseph Carter, according to the city license mounted on the dashboard. A faded photo of 2 young girls was taped beside it. School pictures in a cracked plastic frame. Donald leaned back against warm vinyl and tried to organize his thoughts. Wendy would help him make sense of this. They'd been together since they were 15. High school sweethearts who'd set their wedding for December 31st, 1999, laughing over Prince's song back when they were kids. The Millennium Wedding seemed romantic then. She was elegant, beautiful, and demanding. Status mattered to Wendy. She came from tobacco wealth, her trust fund paying monthly installments that out-earned most people's yearly salary. Her father ran First Carolina Capital Bank. Her mother glided through Charlotte's socialite scene with practiced grace. Donald's folks, Buster and Hope Pickett, had built comfortable lives through hard work. Buster co-founding AEPY Insurance Group, Hope thriving in real estate. Both families ran in country club circles, but the Reynolds had generational money. The Picketts had earned theirs. Wendy was all about reputation. Donald had never been with anyone else, had never known easy. She had his heart, and she knew it, but she loved him, had loved him since they were teenagers. She'd stand by him. She had to. Lost a job once, Joe said, eyes on the late afternoon traffic. Boss thought I was skimming fares. Took a month to clear my name. Donald looked up, pulled from his thoughts. what happened. New dispatch system came in, computer tracking instead of logbooks. Numbers didn't match up for 6 drivers, mine included. Boss accused us all, but he was really gunning for me. I'd filed a complaint about the company's maintenance a few weeks before. Joe switched lanes smoothly. Told me I was done. Called me a thief in front of the whole garage. I got 2 little girls at home. He tapped the photo, and suddenly I couldn't feed them. Your wife stood by you? Every day. Fought harder for me than I fought for myself. Worked double shifts at Harris Teeter while I cleared my name. Joe glanced in the rearview mirror. Turned out the whole system was glitched. Software error from installation. Not me, not anybody skimming. Did you get your job back? Joe laughed without humor. Hell no. Boss wasn't about to admit he was wrong. But I got a letter from an accountant proving I was innocent. Used that to get hired here. He paused. My wife could have walked. We were broke. I was accused of being a thief. We had a baby coming. She had family with money, but she stayed. She believed me when nobody else did. The words settled over Donald like a weight. Joe's wife had stood by him. That's what love looked like. That's what partnership meant. You got someone who'll stand with you? Joe asked. I'm about to find out. The cab pulled up to their house, a spacious 2-story colonial brick facade warm under the late afternoon sun. Wendy's ML500 sat in the driveway, silver paint gleaming. Relief flooded through Donald. She was home. She'd listen. Give me just a minute, Donald told Joe. I need to grab some cash. He climbed out and paused in the driveway, looking at the house he'd bought 3 years ago, the house where they'd start their family. He'd chosen every detail carefully, location, school district, the big backyard for a swing set. He'd been so proud the day he'd carried Wendy over the threshold. Now he felt like a stranger approaching his own front door. The door wasn't quite latched, as if someone had been carrying things in and out. Through the gap, he heard movement, quick, purposeful footsteps. Donald pushed the door open. Wendy's jasmine perfume hit him immediately, mixed with vanilla candles. Normally, the scent meant home. Today, it smelled like goodbye. She appeared from the bedroom, bags in hand. Her face was a storm of anger and disappointment. Her usually perfect blonde hair was disheveled, pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Her makeup was smudged. Donald, what the hell did you do? The question hit him like a physical blow. What are you doing? I'm packing my shit. I'm leaving you. We're done. Done? The word caught in his throat. She yanked open a duffel bag, his old Georgia Tech bag, and started shoving clothes inside with violent efficiency. Did I stutter, Donald? I'm not going to be with some loser. You have really screwed up, and your name is about to be a pariah in this town. Hold the phone, Wendy. This is not what happened.
I woke in the still of the morning, coffee steam in a sideways sun. No warning came with the dawning, but the edges begun.
In the mirror, a stranger stared back, eyes tired from chasing the dream. The road ahead faded to black, though it looked like gold in the gleam.
Every truth has a shadow, every light burns a cost. You don't know you're on the edge till you've already lost. I'm standing on the edge of it all,
Hearing the cracks start to call.
the sky's still blue, but the wind's grown cold,
And the story's about to unfold.
phone rings with a name I don't trust. A whisper runs under their words. Every promise they make turns to dust. Every song that they sing goes unheard.
Every truth has a shadow,